and the fact that we're all kind of hunkered down and cooped up at home has the potential to either make you realize you married the perfect person, or certainly to also expose the fact that even those of us who love and adore each other sometimes, 24/7 can be a lot for even the best and most beautiful of families. And some of the work that Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles does is domestic violence work. And I know that there's also been a lot highlighting the fact that in the midst of this pandemic, cases of domestic violence are absolutely on the rise, which is tragic to say the very least. So I'm thrilled to welcome Phong Wong to join us today. Fong's the pro bono director at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. We've known each other close to 10 years now, I think, since one of our very first pro bono clinics we did, long before Karsh even opened. I think it was an expungement clinic, maybe. I think we did for folks who convicted of misdemeanors. So Phong, thanks for being with us. Welcome. So maybe for those who aren't familiar, we've had guests from some of your friends and mine, Diego from Beit Tzedek and David from Public Counsel and folks kind of from other legal service providers, but you all have a lot in common, but you're also all very different. So maybe let's kind of start there with just the broad view of LAFLA and kind of what you guys do every day.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I've been at LAFLA for 16 years, and throughout that entire time, our work has not changed. We continue to serve low-income individuals in the greater Los Angeles area. We have 5 different offices that are spread out throughout Los Angeles and greater Los Angeles. And we also have 4 self-help centers that provide assistance to self-represented litigants that are based out of the courts. And unfortunately, those are all closed right now. And we also have 3 domestic violence centers that provide assistance to DV victims who are seeking restraining orders. And so, the work that we do continues whether or not there is a pandemic. And unfortunately, now that there is a pandemic and a lot of organizations and our offices are closed, it is so much harder for folks who need free legal assistance to actually get a hold of us. We've done as much as we can getting the word out and providing our 1-800 number. We've increased our hotline presence. We've done advertisements in Spanish radio, in Spanish media, just to get the word out to the greater community. And one of the difficult things too is that our organization works with many community partners, including the Karsh Center, including many of the ethnic organizations that support the many groups that we represent. And because many of those organizations' doors are closed, access is even further limited. And one thing that is unique about LAFLA is we have a special Asian Pacific Islander unit that provides free legal assistance to individuals who do not speak English, who speak Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Khmer, and I'm missing Vietnamese and Tagalog. And so for those folks, it's even harder to reach us because our doors aren't open. And so we're grappling with how to provide the same level of services, even though our doors are shut. And this is something that we've tweaked along the way in the 4 months that we've had to practice. And we're continuing to improve our presence in the community virtually, like many of our legal aid partners.
Right. So what is that? What does that look like, right? Obviously, you're not sitting down in person with folks. I know you guys had it seemed like a pretty robust sort of digital connection with folks, from the libraries and Chromebooks and that whole kind of program. I'm assuming that's expanded. But so yeah, what is, to go a little deeper, how, like it has for all of us, forced us to change the way we operate and change how we live our lives and how we run our businesses. How has this really played out? Are you seeing clients who need you who are unable to access you because they lack technology? Is there a challenge on your side with volunteers and staff? How does it play out?
So what's interesting, I think in the beginning, I would say March, April, we saw a difficulty. We saw our clients and our volunteers have some difficulty using on the GoToMeeting or Zoom, how to navigate video conference. So we saw that in the beginning. I feel like by now, many of the volunteers or our pro bono partners are very, they're used to it or they're familiar with it. Our clients are as well, surprisingly, and that's because many of our clients do have smartphones. And so they're able to access video conference, and you kind of see them, moving it around. It's a little different from, folks who do have computers and who have internet. Although I should point out that our clients, if they don't have a smartphone, they use their, their child's, tablet or whatever, because many of those folks do have school-age children at the time had free internet access. I don't know what's going on now that we're in the summer, but the number one issue that we've been seeing with our clients in general is just lack of access. Many of our clients are so low income that they have flip phones and they prepay for minutes, and if they can't afford to populate their phones with minutes, we don't have access. And so that's been very challenging. And given that the current economic crisis, our clients are in even worse situations than before. And so whereas before, when clients couldn't come in, right, they'll take the bus and come in and give us documentation that we need, or sign the retainer agreement, or get photocopies of documents so that they can go to court. We can't provide that service anymore because we're closed. And so things are much slower because they're mailing in documents to us because they don't have access to a fax machine. In the past, we would send them to one of our partners, our library partners, some of our community organizations, but because they're all closed, just representing an individual in just a basic case is just dragging on much longer. And we're seeing that with our domestic violence victims as well, because they're sheltering in place, sometimes with their abuser, and trying to get a hold of us, during quiet time it can be difficult. And so we've changed the way that we work to respond to the needs of our clients. And so, what in the past we would have many clinics, and clients would just walk in and we would be able to help them immediately. Now we have to prep their paperwork, sign them on as a client, make sure that they qualify. And all of this is through phone and snail mail. So as you can imagine, just justice is slightly slower because of the situation that we're in.
Right. I think mail is already, to a certain extent delayed. And I'm guessing that you guys are not in the office every day. So who's just logistically, how are you managing mail?
We have a few essential workers there to help check mail, help get deliveries, service. So we do have one or two individuals in each office just for those essential functions, but for the most part, we are closed to the public.
Yeah. Processing on. So let's you mentioned it, let's talk a little bit more about the DV work you guys do, because I know it's you do more of it, if I'm not mistaken, you do more of it than anybody else in this space. And so maybe just a little bit about kind of what it has always looked like, and what, if you've seen an increase in cases in the last 4 or 5 months, or what it looks like now.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, in the past, we had 3 domestic violence clinics that were based out of the courts. And those clinics allowed for walk-ins. So individuals, DV victims who sought restraining orders would walk in to get information. And we had volunteers who would assist them with the petition. And within a couple or few hours after sitting with our volunteer or our staff members, they could just walk into the filing room and file their petition. And it was a very quick and seamless process. Now, these individuals have to call into our hotline, and we have adjusted our workload so that we provide immediate assistance to folks who reach out to us because of the sensitive nature of the stay in place orders, right? They may be in a home with the abuser, and if they reach out to us, that might be the key time that we can actually connect with them and talk to them. And so we are providing immediate assistance. And we've had some wonderful volunteers who've made themselves available to just assist as soon as we get a client in place. And so again, the process is still taking much longer because having to go through the entire system, not just doing the actual pleadings to complete the application, but also getting signatures, doing the filing, getting the opposing party served. So what LAFLA is doing right now during this time is we are paying for all that. We're providing that service. We're getting, having the clients sign on their phone through DocuSign. So we've kind of used the technology that we have in place to try to streamline that process so that we could provide, quick service. And so far it's been effective, but what we've seen, the cases are so much more egregious right now. And I think it's because, and I think, many of us have kind of heard what's been in the media, but what I've seen and the cases I've been placed, many of the cases are just more egregious, more extreme abuse, regular abuse, extended abuse. And I think one of the concerns that we've heard time and time again from the victims is, I have nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. I don't have any money. If I lost my job, and if I'm forced to leave the house, I have no resources whatsoever. And the domestic violence shelters have also, due to social distancing, they've limited the number of individuals who can live in those shelters. And so there are fewer of those. I know that there's been efforts to put those folks in motels, and but still, there is still a delay in getting those services because of the pandemic that we're in. And so it's really sad to hear so many of these stories, and the abuse is not just to the adult victims, but also to children are also witnessing this because they're sheltering in place. They're seeing the abuse that's happening, and so that's a second common issue that we've seen. Children who've not just been exposed to the violence, but sometimes are victims themselves. And so it really is a shame what has happened, and it's many problems just confounded. Loss of income, sheltering in place, no hope of future employment or financial assistance, and it's a terrible situation. And we're fortunate to be able to have volunteers who can help us with some of these cases that do come in.
Well, and you mentioned sort of the privacy, as it were, issue of being sheltered in place, which, on the most mundane or kind of benign level, right, plays out in families in which you've got two kids trying to do online school and mom and dad trying to work, and, everybody, and God bless whatever architect came up with the open floor plan, everybody's sitting in the same room, talking at the same time. So I imagine that it's, as you kind of alluded to, it's difficult sometimes for you guys to connect with a DV victim who's a client, because there's nowhere to go, right? They're not going to leave the house to meet, obviously, in person. And is it it's like in the bathroom on your phone or what have you, to try to have a few minutes of privacy to have a particularly sensitive conversation with an attorney.
Exactly. And then, one thing to keep in mind too, with many of our clients, who are extremely low income, they may be living with another family. Or, there are a lot of individuals living in their home. They may not have access to an empty room because of their living situation.
So has, I think across all your services has, kind of I guess the pressure cooker that this whole experience, I think, kind of is for a lot of folks, and the obviously the economic reality of it has put a tremendous number of folks out of work, have put a tremendous number of folks who were not below the poverty line, now below the poverty line and in great need. Are you guys seeing new areas that folks need assistance in, or new areas of service?
Sure. Yes. I think unemployment or employment issues, safety in the workplace for many of the essential workers that have been called to go back to work. And many of those are our clients because they, have, those are the jobs that they occupy. And we've also seen an uptick in just generally, the legal services community has seen an uptick in small businesses seeking assistance because they don't know how to apply for the special loans and the other programs that are out there. Domestic violence is definitely an issue that we've seen, as I mentioned earlier. And I think we've all seen this in the news. Housing is probably the number one issue across the board that we're all seeing. Not necessarily evictions because of the moratorium or the other stay orders for filing of evictions, but a lot of it has to do with landlords and pressure from landlords who are trying to get rental payment. This is going to be a crisis that not only Los Angeles is going to see, but folks throughout the nation. Many folks who are unemployed and who at some point will stop getting the extra unemployment benefits are going to have a problem with how they're going to pay for rent. Some of them are already in arrears, and continuing on is going to be difficult. And so what does that mean when the stay-in-place order lifts and when the moratorium lifts?
Right, because that, if correct me if I'm so, tenants' rights issues, that makes perfect sense. But because correct me if I'm wrong, at least at the moment, right? No one is saying that your rent's going to be forgiven. So it's just a balloon payment down the road, and you haven't been working, so that it just makes it worse. Not, I would say, not better, right?
Yes.
And aren't those evictions coming? If there's a moratorium, that's going to go away.
Yes.
And you owe a year's worth of back rent that you're never going to be able to pay. I have to believe you're going to get evicted.
Yes, it's going to be a very difficult situation because there are a lot of projections out there about what we're going to see based on the unemployment rate, based on the unemployment filings, and it's going to be a problem. Not just for the tenants who are going to be evicted or homeless, but also for the landlords who, there may be a shortage of tenants who are able to afford their units, and the various municipalities can't absorb the sheer number of folks who will end up being homeless. So this is a huge problem that every major city throughout the nation is grappling with. And we at Legal Aid, we're trying to figure out how we can best assist in this situation. Currently we're getting a lot of complaints about landlord harassment and questions about 3-day notices and 30-day notices. And so we're dealing with that now, but we're also developing trainings so that we can prepare volunteers to step in and help with this issue when it becomes an issue, when the floodgates open.
Yeah. You mentioned uptick in small business owners looking for assistance and accessing some of the CARES Act provisions and things that are out there, and that's definitely a theme that we've heard a few times in these conversations. Are there other folks that you're seeing who, you know, might not have been clients of LAFLA's 6 months ago, who never imagined that they'd, you know, be turning to you for help? Has the like kind of typical profile of a client changed at all?
Yes, and these, you know, these are folks who, I guess we call the working poor. These are folks who, you know, had jobs, had multiple jobs, and then all of a sudden they're finding that they, you know, no longer, you know, have employment, and so they're seeking assistance through us for unemployment, what have you. And then on the other end, we're getting questions from the small businesses. So for example, we represent many folks in the Koreatown community, and many of these individuals have come to us with unemployment assistance. And then on the other end, we're getting questions from the small businesses who may have employed these individuals, asking about, you know, the special loans and other programs that they may be eligible for. So we're trying to balance that out because we don't want to create conflicts. And we're grateful for many of our partners that have opened up their doors to help with small business issues, Betsedic, you know, being one of them. And so we've been sending folks to our partner organizations to avoid those expected conflicts that come up.
Yeah, it's sort of both sides of the equation, right? Are in need, right? People who are out of work, and the people who employ them, who, you know, wish that they could still employ them, but have their own challenges, right, in trying to keep businesses open.
Exactly, and the assistance for both sides is so necessary. And as you can imagine, when you think about a community like Koreatown, it's made up of so many small mom and pop businesses, and many of the workers live in the community. And if these businesses shut down en masse, it really will change the nature of what, you know, Koreatown is, right? And we're seeing this in other areas as well, Chinatown.
And restaurants, you know, particularly, I think most people on the call know that, you know, I'm a foodie, and restaurants are near and dear to my heart. But I remember saying early on that Koreatown restaurants in the very beginning were disproportionately affected, more so than in other neighborhoods, maybe perhaps for that same reason that they're small mom and pop. And I think also, you know, early on, some of the sort of xenophobia, for lack of a better word, and frankly, you know, racist ignorance, that patronizing, you know, Korean or Chinese businesses was somehow connected to this virus, and it was more prevalent in API communities, which, you know, we all know is not the case. The virus does not discriminate, right?
Exactly.
So what, I mean, I ask this question of everyone, but I think it's in the nonprofit world anyway, you know, beyond money, because we all need more of that to do the amazing work we do, and we all have funding constraints. But beyond that, what's the biggest challenge that LAFLA faces, you know, kind of pre-COVID, you know, currently, just in trying to do the amazing work you guys do every day?
Wow, you know, I know that we don't have a ton of time, so I'm just gonna focus on one or two things. But you know, we have a lot of concerns. You know, technology is one. You know, how can we bridge the technology divide between what we have, what our volunteers have, and what our clients don't have? Because, you know, free legal service is going to continue to be limited because our clients don't have access. And so I know that we have discussed providing free, we have a number of free phones that we can provide to clients so that they could use it. But, you know, that's a resource that is also limited. You know, we've also talked about lending our tablets, Chromebooks to various partners so that they can provide access to some degree. But given this, I shouldn't say second wave, but this you know, the closures again, that's, you know, more difficult now, because I know when things are starting to open up, many of our partners, you know, were open to the idea of opening their doors on a limited basis for to provide access. But technology is definitely a continuing problem that we see. And it's a problem that's beyond legal aid, right? It's a problem that many low-income families struggle with. It's a problem that many low-income families who have students or children struggle with. And so I think that's an issue that's been raised a number of times, not just in the legal aid context, but broadly. It's also been raised in the medical field too, for folks who can get remote medical assistance or medical appointments. So technology is a huge one. Second is, for me, wearing the pro bono hat is how to meaningfully provide volunteer opportunities when things are so much slower than they used to be, right? And so, what I've done is asked volunteers to be flexible with the scope of the work that they're doing, with the area of law. I know in the past, folks are really interested in litigation, or making appearances and practicing their litigation skills, but the courts, are open only for limited purposes. And so we ask, so I've asked volunteers to be flexible about the type of work that they do. But I still get a lot of requests for some of the what I call the usual or the pre-COVID projects that really don't exist on the same level. And so it's been tough engaging volunteers in the same way, because the expectations are the same, but the circumstances are different. And so this summer we've welcomed 25 summer law students, and normally we have like an engaging orientation, and we have events and programs for them to participate in, and it's much more difficult doing this remotely. And so I think that's the one thing that has been very difficult, and I think it's again beyond just legal services. How do we meaningfully engage with the community to invite them to participate in the service that we do, and then at the same time ask them to be really flexible about the work that they do. So that's the one thing that has been very difficult, and I am very grateful for the many supporters who have reached out to provide assistance in the current work that we do, and that makes a huge difference, because we continue to rely on volunteers to help expand the services that we provide in the community.
Right, and just what is, we deal with it, at Karsh too, right? Trying to mobilize volunteers, and Lizzie and I were talking about this morning, is just how do we create a meaningful opportunity for someone to volunteer that is not in person, that maybe at some point is in person, but is socially distant. And when so much of the work that we all do is really about kind of the face-to-face human engagement and connection and relationship, and how does that happen in a way that meets a client's needs, but that also meets the enlightened self-interest of the volunteer that wants to have a good and meaningful experience. And definitely, lots of questions without easy answers. I want to be respectful of your time, and I know we have a couple folks who've already told me they have questions in the chat. Gary, why don't you go ahead, and anybody else who has a question, you can, actual hand raise, digital hand raise, you can drop it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. Jeff, I see your hand as well. So Gary, go ahead.
I was going to ask a question on a rental, but I'm going to switch to the internet and computer issue, technology. Is it a matter of not having enough computers for these people to use? So you can provide computers if you get computers.
So we have not given computers, you mean like to community partners?
Right.
We started having that discussion, but the community partners are no longer opening. So that's the main issue. We do have a number of Chromebooks that we were planning to loan to some of our community partners, so that we can, open up our clinics at least remotely, so that clients who do come in, they can sit in front of, like 3 to 5 Chromebooks or tablets and be able to meet virtually with our volunteers. But
the reason I asked that is that there was a nonprofit in Israel recently that needed to provide computers to children who needed to have online education but had no computers. So they basically went out and negotiated and bought 500 computers from a major provider, raised funds to do it, and then gave it out to the different kids that needed it. That was just an idea.
Oh, wow, that's great.
I imagine the other piece of the issue, right, is, a Chromebook is great, assuming you have a broadband connection to connect your Chromebook to, which, I know is also a big issue. I know certainly school age folks in Phong, it's a good question. I don't know what's happening over the summer, but I know through, I believe it's Spectrum and Verizon, or
They're
AT&T
giving
and
away
Verizon,
stuff, yeah.
eligible for free broadband service. But that's another gap that, most of us don't think about. We just complain when our connection's not as stable as we want and we get kicked off of Zoom, right, Jody? But at least we have it. And so that's a whole other piece of it too, I imagine.
Yeah.
Jeff, I know your hand was up.
Thank you. One of the things that I don't really understand well is with true domestic violence, the only safe option for the abused is separation or isolation, either individually or with their children. This idea that they can cohabitate with the abuser, obviously there has to be tremendous recidivism because things aren't getting better economically, financially, or whatever. So what resources, safe houses, etc. The whole idea of a safe house was that it was unknown to the abuser, just to keep them separated. So I don't understand the ability to house these people in the same setting of abuse. And the other issue I had is the demographics that you're seeing. Ethnically, you may be in Koreatown, but what is the actual nature? Is there a difference by social sect, so to speak, in the amount of abuse that you see?
Great questions. So unfortunately, even before COVID, there have never been enough domestic violence shelters to serve the needs of the many victims that we do see. And that's an unfortunate reality. What often happens with our clients, even before the pandemic, is there was a waiting list, or we would have to send them further away instead of the local domestic violence shelter. And so those are decisions that many of these victims are forced to make because they have nowhere to go and they have no resources. And they don't know about some of the programs that are out there that may be available to them. And so we've been trying to do outreach so that we can at least, if not help them through the DV restraining order process, at least provide some resources so that they can have choices that they can make for not just themselves, but their families. And a second question, it's what we are seeing just even before the pandemic, victims who did not speak English, and these were, victims from various ethnic groups, especially the API groups, the abuse is much more egregious by far. And partly, it may be, just not knowing where to go because of the language barrier, right? Multiple reasons. It could be also cultural, like we don't want to let this get out. We're going to have this facade and don't want to be embarrassed and have the community know that I'm a victim of domestic violence because there's shame associated with that. So these are many things that we do see with the many ethnic groups that we do serve.
You wonder, since we're a Jewish group here for the most part, it certainly doesn't spare the Jewish population and the stresses involved in COVID and all the other things we've already mentioned, certainly doesn't exempt us from familial abuses of all sorts. And though you're located in such a way you may not see this population, what do we know about that, if anything?
I can't really speak in general or specifically about the Jewish community, but I can say that domestic violence cuts across all groups, whether you're low income or you're higher income. We've seen a number of domestic violence victims who walk through our doors who come from various backgrounds. I could tell you that in terms of just the cases that I've placed, the abuser was a police officer, pastor, professor. I know there was one conflict from a local university, and it was shocking who the abuser was. And surprisingly, we get a handful of pastors who are, the abusers. And I think
as long as they're not rabbis.
When you think about just the stress involved in any of these jobs, right? There is some connection to domestic violence, but
and I think, Phong, correct me if I'm wrong, also fair to say, and I can just share anecdotally that, because my phone is often the one that rings as well. It most certainly is as prevalent in the Jewish community as it is in any other community. But also, I think people don't think about, people generally associate domestic violence with a male being the aggressor,
yeah,
which is not always the case. In fact,
absolutely,
correct.
Absolutely.
There are a large number of cases in which the man can be the victim in a heterosexual relationship.
Yeah, one recent case that I just I placed I think a month ago. The victim was male or is male, and the abuse had been going on for years. But his response was, "I don't want to get her in trouble. I mean, she's just hitting me. It's not a big
Right.
deal." But now that the child's involved,
Right.
it finally reached out.
And how does it reflect on my own masculinity, that I'm a victim, and that
Exactly.
all that. I'm conscious of your time, and I know Merle has been patiently waiting with a question. So Merle, I'm going to let you have the last word here.
I was just going to say that, first of all, thank you, because this is amazing work that you guys do and attempt to do. But, the housing, the whole situation with domestic abuse is a nightmare. We had a situation down the street from us last night where a very well-known man in the Scottsdale community chased his ex-wife's car. And they weren't living together, but he was dealing with issues. We're not sure what. And the kids were in the car with her, and he shot at the car and shot the son. So this affects the whole family. And what I'm thinking from what I heard last night, aside from sirens and everything, helicopters, the whole thing, is that one, it affects everyone in the family, and two, people in general with whatever abuse situations there are, I'm watching people so short-tempered and so over-disciplinary with their kids. And in a case where we talked about 4 kids and 2 kids and 2 parents in the house, doing their homework and working and everything together, the discipline has become abusive. And it's frightening to be with these people and see what they're going through. And it goes beyond whatever any of us can do, because we don't know what's going on in people's homes and what's causing it.
Sure. And, as you can imagine, when you think about, one thing that we haven't talked about is our victims who are undocumented and what must go through their mind when they're the victim and their abuser may be a permanent resident or a citizen, right? The power dynamics related to that. And unsurprisingly, we get many of those individuals are our clients, and we help them not just with the restraining order, but with also U visa or VAWA or what have you.
Well, Phong, thank you so much for a really, certainly not an easy conversation, but an important one and a meaningful one. And obviously, thank you for the incredible work that you and everybody at LAFLA does, every day for folks who so desperately need it. Lucky to have you guys out there on the front lines. So thank you so much, and I look forward to someday seeing you again in person.
Yes, and thank you all for inviting me on this forum and having this conversation. I think it's always great to be able to share the work that we do and get the word out about the folks that we represent, because the reality is many of them don't have a voice, and many of our volunteers are connected to us, and they have an opportunity to kind of share the work that we do. But the reality is, you know, a lot of their suffering is in silence. So thank you again.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
All right, great to see everybody. I'll hopefully see you guys next week. Next week, I'll just tee it up. We're going to be joined by my friend Joel Roberts, who's the CEO of PATH, People Assisting the Homeless, one of the long time and storied LA homeless services providers that is continuing to do amazing work through this whole experience. So hopefully you'll join us next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.